Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is March 9th. It is approximately 6:30 in the evening, and I want to talk to you about, there's some important news that's happening. Obviously, insurrection is in the news. The future of our democracy is at risk, or at least this is what we keep being told. We are told that we must be vigilant or else. But we're also told to take people's word for it, to just believe them when they tell us who is the bad guy and not ask any questions. But is that really what should be happening? Is what we are being told the truth, and what aren't we being told that is also the truth? That's a big question. And we want to address that here today a little bit with you, and I hope you'll watch the whole video. But if it is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear what you have to say about the issues that matter to us all. We want to hear your voice from anywhere in the world because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in free speech, not just an American principle, but for everyone, that you have a right to talk about the issues that affect you and all of us. And you can reach us through your tweets, your chats, and phone calls from anywhere in the world. So we look forward to seeing you this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now let's talk about insurrection. It's a difficult topic, or at least it seems to be a difficult topic. It really shouldn't be. But we've been talking about this since January of 2021, as we have seen more and more people demonized throughout America for their position. We've seen this affect senators. We've seen this affect regular average citizens, whole swaths of America. In fact, today, half of America is demonized for being MAGA, for being individuals who believe in an America First policy, who believe in making America great. I don't know what the problem is with that. What's wrong with America being great, being the greatest nation that it can be? Apparently, there's a big problem with that. There's a big problem with speaking up against the government. It is a massive issue. It is such an issue that presenting the American people with information is tantamount to having a crime. I mean, that's exactly what we saw with Tucker Carlson this week, isn't it? Tucker Carlson went on national airwaves on Monday, and he provided additional information for the American people. He provided us with video of the January 6th riots. He showed us the, quote, QAnon shaman, and he showed video that has never before in 2 years, almost 3 years, been presented to the American people. Video of what was actually happening in the halls of Congress on January 6, 2021. That the QAnon shaman was being escorted by Capitol Police officers. That he passed by almost half a dozen or more police officers several times as he was walking around, being escorted around our Capitol. It's not the image, it's not the message that we have been told over and over again was this violent insurrection. And because Tucker Carlson showed us that information, well, obviously Tucker is a bad man. He did the wrong thing. He's trying to incite insurrection. He is trying to mislead the American people by providing them evidence. There's 40,000 hours of video on that day alone in the Capitol and surrounding area showing the American people, or available to show the American people, what happened on a day that we have been told is an insurrection. And yet, that's not what we're being told. I think most recently there was Dave Rubin was talking about this today at 11 a.m., and he was noting in part,
I just can't. I like Tucker. I truly like Tucker. I think he is a good guy, and I think he actually is an honest guy as far as I can tell, right? I don't know. But the point is, why is it that by videos being released, everyone is freaking out across the aisle, right? He's not manipulating these videos, because if he was manipulating these videos, people would be countering it, but they're not. They're just saying, don't see it. Don't look. Oh, there's a fire over there. Look the other way.
Yeah, we're not being shown everything. We're not being told everything. And anyone who dares to tell people more, to provide the American people with context and full disclosure and evidence, well, that's just wrong. We've been told, and we're being told again by Stephen Colbert, by Senator Chuck Schumer, you don't need to see anything else. You don't need to know anything else. Whoopi Goldberg is going on to The View saying, you don't need to see this. In fact, it should be a crime to show you what actually happened, to give you evidence and to allow you to understand the context so that you can better make a decision for yourself. Was this a riot? Was it an insurrection? Were these individuals trying to take over the government? Were they the evil demons that they have been portrayed as? That's a decision for you to make. It should be a decision for you to make. We're in America. You have the right to make choices. You have the freedom to discuss issues. That's the First Amendment. We're supposed to be able to talk about our government and our leaders and the issues that face us. But yet, we're not allowed to do that. We're told this is the opinion you're supposed to have. And we are being told by these same elected officials, you can't see more. The January 6th committee already went through this. They already found all the information that you need to know. Well, that's censorship. That's propaganda. That's authoritarian. Whether or not you think January 6th was an inside operation, whether you think it was manipulation by outside actors, whether you think it was an actual insurrection, doesn't matter. The evidence should be something you can see. Why won't they show us the evidence? Why are they so upset that when evidence of what happened that day is being shown to the American people, no one is disputing that? No one has said that the video presented by Tucker Carlson is not real, that it didn't exist, that it is somewhat made up or fabricated. They're trying to say, well, you didn't show enough, but wait a minute. How do we know that? How do you know that? How does Chuck Schumer know whether or not Tucker Carlson has shown us all the evidence? Has he seen more video than we have? And if there's more evidence that supports the opinion of Whoopi Goldberg, of Chuck Schumer, of Stephen Colbert, if there's evidence that proves this insurrection, that there was some plot going on, that that people on January 6th attempted to burn down the Capitol, that they attempted to steal nuclear codes or other sensitive information, if that exists, why don't they show it to us? How hard could it be? Show us that evidence. Refute what has been put out there by Tucker Carlson. And in fact, not just Tucker Carlson. For the last 2 years, we have seen many individuals, and we've seen this with Look Ahead America, and private individuals who have presented video on YouTube, on Rumble, on social media, saying, no, there's more to this story than you were told, including the fact that the Capitol Police were beating an unconscious woman laying on the ground. Oh, but you didn't know about that. That's not a story you were told. No, instead you were told that 5 police officers died because of January 6th, except there's no evidence to prove that. Suicides are not something that someone did to them. That's something they did to themselves. A heart attack isn't indicative of something that happened that day. No, we do know Americans died on January 6th, American citizens, Ashley Babbitt being probably the best known of them. And that was unnecessary, as we have shown previously on this channel. The Capitol Police had control of the area that Ashley Babbitt was in, and they left. The police left that area, and then Ashley Babbitt was shot. Unnecessarily, we would say. And then the police returned to the area. And the only video you were shown is her being shot and the police entering, not the 2 minutes beforehand where the police had complete control of that area. So obviously there's a problem here. The context that Americans keep asking for is show us the evidence. Show us all the evidence. Don't give us the edits. Show us the whole thing. But the news media is built, the modern major news media are built around the idea of 30-second sound bites. That all the news you need will be given to you in a minute and a half. That all you need is a sentence or two in any particular point. And that's it. If it can't be covered in a minute and a half, well, that's just too much information. You don't need to know. Take their word for it. Trust them. And I say no. We have no reason to do so. There's no reason to trust them blanket. We have seen over and over again that we have been misled by the major mainstream news media. We have been shown over and over again. We have been misled by our government. And you can go back in time or you can just look at currently what's going on. Yes, the Hunter laptop is one such example of that, and probably one of the best known examples of that, but there are many others. And so we have to ask the question, why should we just take their word for it? When evidence exists, thousands of hours of evidence exists, and we can be shown in full without edit the context so that we can make our own decision. And anyone who doesn't want you to do that, well, then I would have to believe they have a reason for not giving you the evidence, not allowing you to understand the context, in not accepting what they tell you to believe, because they're telling you to obey. And if the only answer they have as a response to Tucker Carlson, to Dave Rubin, to conservatives across America and across the world, if the only answer to their opposition is obey, well, that's not an answer, is it? And it should raise red flags and make people wonder, well, why won't you actually refute this by showing us your evidence, by giving us the information and letting us understand it for ourselves? This isn't classified information. This isn't something that is secret. This is something that we know happened, that there is video clips across the nation that have been put out over the last 2 years. We've had people make their testimony. Not that we've been told about it. So why can't we be shown this? Why can't the American people make a decision unless the people who are opposing this think that if you have the evidence, you might get a different opinion than the one that benefits them? Let's look at it from a different point of view. What is an insurrection? We've talked about that back in January of 2021. And I thought we covered it pretty well back then. But maybe we didn't. Maybe it wasn't clear enough. Let's look at it from another way. Because we have often said on this channel that the biggest question about insurrection are autonomous zones. We have made this case since 2020, actually before 2020. In 2016, we were talking about autonomous zones. The influence of groups like BLM and Antifa in American politics and in our lives. And we've made the claim that an insurrection is correctly noted that when a group of individuals for political motivations take over, capture, and kidnap whole sections of property, of land, of cities in America, in many cases holding American citizens hostage, kidnapped in areas that they declare that no local, state, or federal law applies, that is an insurrection. That's not just an autonomous zone, which is the nice way of saying this is a takeover, that this is an attempt to usurp the power of the government, because that is what they are doing by definition. Each and every one of these autonomous zones say that every law at the local, state, and federal level do not apply to them. That is insurrectionist. That is treason. That is an insurrection. By definition, there is no other way to define it. There is no other way to see it. And these groups know that. That's why they declare that they are outside of the law on U.S. territory, often involving American citizens that have no choice. They are within the captured territory of these insurrectionists, these autonomous zones, these far left enclaves that were forced upon them. The autonomous zones in Portland, in Seattle, in Minneapolis, in Austin, and New York City, the public weren't asked if they want to be part of that. The public wasn't polled. They didn't vote. They didn't come out and make a decision to say, this is what we want. They woke up in the morning and they were enclosed. They had already been kidnapped in the middle of the night, surrounded by a group of essentially warlords, blocking off the police and essential services from them, that they could not escape. This wasn't voluntary. This was an act of criminality against them, a violent action in many cases. And so when we're talking about that, we have to let's just look at the most recent example of one of the autonomous zones that is showing us what an insurrection actually is and the evidence that is available. And the question I would pose to you is, why aren't we seeing more of this? Why is so much attention being put on Tucker Carlson when at the same time we are actively seeing continuous insurrection zones across America, otherwise known as autonomous zones, otherwise called protests, peaceful protests? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. And we were covering in February the Cop City, quote, protests and the fact that they were going nationwide in Atlanta. Now, as we covered at that time, the reason why there was a protest or a violent action, in other words, was because of the autonomous zone, the insurrection zone, that the Defenders of Atlanta Forest had created. A group of individuals, many of them from outside of Georgia, had decided that they didn't like the plans of the Atlanta city government, the duly elected representatives of the people, to create a facility for police, firemen, and emergency medical services personnel. They didn't like that. So they went into part of the forest in the surrounding area. They took it over, public lands. They took it for their political purposes, and they tried to prevent the police from doing their job, enacting the law as required by the city of Atlanta. And this, of course, cost money for the citizens of Atlanta. It disrupted the life of people in Atlanta because they were also interrupting, going in and vandalizing buildings and businesses and government buildings. So this is bad for the local community. It's bad for the state. It's bad on almost every level you can think of. It costs people money. It's costing time. It's frightening and intimidating the public. It's a matter of coercion. This is violating laws left and right. And the autonomous zone, like all autonomous zones, declared clearly and fully and publicly that they were outside the local, state, and federal laws because they decided to, because they said so. And they wanted to be seen as heroes. I don't think that's heroic at all. And in their defense of their captured territory, the treasonous action they took, one of their individuals got killed because that protester, that far leftist, got into a firefight with police officers. This wasn't an innocent person just standing around doing nothing. This was someone who engaged with law enforcement doing their job and in an armed conflict was killed. But the leftists said, no, that's evil. How dare you defend yourself? How dare you oppose their desires and their lawlessness? And so they decided to have protests across the nation. Now, let me take a step back because I think it's important to, again, add context to this. According to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, in their most recent data, and this is from 2021, as you can see on the screen, crime and arrests, comparisons from 2017 to 2021. I want to be clear that what we can see is that the number of arrests have been going down year after year after year from 2017 to 2021, where the most recent data has been published. But at the same time, we have seen that there has been an overwhelming number of incidents in particular. And most especially what we have seen is that the number of murders have been increasing in the state of Georgia from 2017 to 2021. That is significant. We have seen that the number of rapes have increased in the state of Georgia from 2017 to 2021. We've seen several crimes that have increased in their magnitude that is affecting the entire state, the entire public, from 2017 to 2021. Why is that worth noting? Because in the same time frame, the number of police and the ability of police has decreased. Now, there are fewer police officers due to the movement to defund the police that has come from the far left activists, from progressive movements like Defenders of Atlanta Forests, BLM, and Antifa. They have been reducing the number of police officers and restricting the capabilities of police officers. Now, that's not always wrong. As we saw in Memphis with Tyre Nichols, sometimes police officers must be punished because they have broken the law, because they are acting outside of the law, or they are abusing their power. And we are perfectly happy to stand by that. Tyre Nichols should never have died. What happened to him should never have occurred. And those officers are being rightly and correctly punished through the judicial system. But that doesn't mean that the entire state should suddenly shut down, that police officers en masse should just be fired and lawlessness should be allowed, or that these individuals in autonomous insurrectionist zones should set up their own individual warlord fiefdoms and create their own sets of laws throughout the United States. That's not the answer. And we know it's not the answer, not only because it is illegal, not only because it is insurrectionist and treasonous, it's also not effective. As we can see on the charts here in front of you, and this has come from citydata.com, looking at the city of Atlanta, we can see year over year, since 2007 to 2020, the last date that they had data on, the number of murders in Atlanta has increased every single year. We have seen overwhelmingly that there has been an increase in the number of robberies. For every year except 2020, we don't see the data for 2021. The number of assaults increased every single year except for 2020, where we don't have data. The number of burglaries increased every single year except for 2020, when we don't have data. And you might say, well, 2020, we saw a bunch of these things reduce. Remember, in 2020, people were locked down. You couldn't go outside your home. People weren't able to freely go to work or interact with each other. People were locked in place for most of that year, or highly restricted throughout the year. In fact, in 2020, we had Dr. Fauci telling the American people that he wasn't sure he would allow people to be able to go to Thanksgiving with their family members, to spend the holidays, Christmas and Hanukkah, with their family members, that if you have more than 6 people in a building, in a house, well, then the police might be necessary to go and arrest you for visiting your family. This is what was happening in 2020, if you don't remember. So yes, many crimes went down. Certain crimes went down in many areas that would involve people leaving their homes and going to other homes, being out in public where they could be identified more easily because there were fewer people out, and much easier to try and track down someone because they were one of the few people who were roaming the cities. But murders did increase. And we have seen since 2020, crimes have increased even more. We have seen more murders. We have seen more violent crimes. And we have seen the progressives create even more autonomous zones and insurrectionist areas throughout the world, throughout our country. So that's important to understand and to put into context. Let me put it in even better context. We saw this week the video, live footage. This is from the Atlanta region, just next to the forest, the area that is being developed by the order of the Atlanta City Council. That these are over 150, as you can see on the screen, I'm going to play this, over 150 different members of the extremist progressive groups here swarming over a facility that they just want to firebomb, that they're attacking police officers, as you can see, as this video shows you, as they are coming in from the top left corner, and you can see them swarm in, that they are starting arson, and they are attacking officers, as you will see. Officers with fireworks, as well as firebombs, as well as rocks and other items. They are endangering the lives of law officers who had committed no crime. These officers weren't going after these individuals. These individuals came after the officers en masse, in force. And as you can see, they are throwing various items, creating barricades, destroying property. By the way, keep in mind, who's going to pay for all of this? The very same poor people that they are saying they're trying to protect. The very poor people of Atlanta and the state of Georgia, their taxes are going to have to pay to fix all the damage and destruction that these individuals have done. That's important to put into perspective. And the result of this has been that multiple individuals were arrested. 23 individuals were arrested on charges of domestic terrorism after we had seen all this violence, after they were involved in autonomous zones, violating every law in the nation, at every level of law in the nation. And they were charged with domestic terrorism because they violated every law in the nation, willfully and purposefully. In fact, they did so well, they were recruiting individuals from outside the state of Georgia, and in fact, outside the United States, bringing in individuals from France and Germany. One of the individuals who happened to be arrested was also a lawyer who claimed that they were just there as an observer. And we've seen what observers have done. We've seen observers kind of like Matt Ryan, as we can see in the center here. Matt Ryan, who went out with the full knowledge of the commission of a crime, did not notify police officers, even though he is a member of the court, and was directly involved in trying to recruit individuals for the criminal actions that were taking place in the southern tier of New York. And very much so, we've seen the same thing with individuals in the Defenders of the Atlanta Forest, BLM, and Antifa, especially in Georgia. That they were bringing together individuals to commit crimes. That this lawyer was well aware of their criminal activities, that they were violating every law in America on purpose. They knew that. So that's the commission of a crime. That's not a bystander watching. That's someone who's involved in that. And of course, this lawyer from the Southern Poverty Law Center, well, he's being defended. We see, as you can see here, in a news article featured on MSN.com, that the lawyer, Tom Jurgens, Atlanta cop city arrest is heavy-handed law enforcement. It is heavy-handed for the police to protect the law, to arrest people for violating every state, local, state, and federal law, for stopping insurrection. That's illegal when it's happening to people on the left. It's heavy-handed when it's happening to people on the left, but it's perfectly fine for people on the right. Remember, It's okay to demonize people who are on the right, but if you happen to do something that the media doesn't like, well, that's something else altogether. If you're doing something like identifying and reminding the public that on May 20th of 2022, the far left Antifa BLM, that they were out rioting, burning down buildings, injuring 180 officers, destroying the public's property, harming the very poor people they say they are for. No, that's bad. That's horrible. You can't do that. And I want to show you. There were 150 people. Look at this line. This is the infrared. This mob, this organized attack force went in to burn down public property, to harm the investment of the public, and take away from the defense the lawful use to prevent law enforcement from trying to reduce the rampant crime that is in Atlanta, that is easily identified as being commonplace since 2007, because they have feelings. And we are seeing that the news media is trying to come out and to protect them for this. That the news media is trying to say that the bad guys are the police officers enforcing the law and the will of the people via their representatives in the city of Atlanta. As an example, this is from the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. The president of this group, Janai Nelson. And Janai Nelson, the Cop City crisis. It's a crisis now. No, it's a crime. It is an act of insurrection. But she wants to call it a crisis. A crisis where the left doesn't agree with what is being done, and so they want to coerce through violence the public. The Cop City crisis is an environmental crisis, a housing crisis, a public safety and racial justice crisis. How is it any of these things? The defenders of the Atlanta forest are the ones who violated every local, state, and federal law. They're the criminals. It is the city of Atlanta that decided to build the facility for police, firemen, and emergency medical services, which is to the benefit of the people of Atlanta. But because the far left don't like that, well, then it must be an environmental crisis. It must be a housing crisis. It must be a public safety crisis. In fact, that one's probably the most insane, because it is directly the quote Cop City is meant to resolve the public safety crisis that has existed since 2007. But yet it's bad because they're not doing what unelected individuals from outside, not just outside Atlanta, not just outside of Georgia, outside the continental United States want to have happen. Does that make sense to anyone? And do you see why I say this is an insurrectionist action? This is criminal on so many levels. And we see it's ongoing right now. Even as we are speaking, the news came out at 3:37 p.m. in ABC. These same insurrectionists have now gone into the city, into Atlanta itself, and are continuing to protest. And I want to say protest with quote marks, because as we've seen in other peaceful protests, that allows for arson, that allows for destruction of property, that allows for not only injuring individuals, but also murder. That's what happened in 2020. That's been happening since 2020. And everywhere there has been an autonomous zone, when we have seen the peaceful protests, we have seen people that have been killed. We have seen people who have been attacked viciously. We have seen lawlessness. We have seen arson every single time. But the news media wants you to think that they are the good guys, that this is okay because they are progressives, because they are left-leaning, because they have decided that those are good people and anyone in opposition must be a bad guy. It's very upsetting. It makes me very upset, as we have been covering this over and over again. And when I say the media wants you to have a certain kind of view on this, this is the Atlanta, all I put in is Atlanta Cop City protest. This is on Google, which we know is altering the algorithms to only show you specific kinds of answers. But according to going there, and I just updated it for you, Atlanta City protesters charged with domestic terror. Clashes over Atlanta's Cop City led to a protester's killing and dozens of arrests. But wait a minute, it led to a killing because the members of Atlanta Defenders of the Forest, they actually engaged in violence, that one of their members got into a shootout with police officers who were doing their job, who had spent weeks trying to peacefully resolve the situation. But if you just read the headline, well, the protesters, they were innocent. They got killed. No, one person got killed because they attacked the police with a firearm. Protesters take to the streets against so-called Cop City training facility. Yes, but is that a good thing? Going on. How Atlanta's Cop City trumped justice. Notice they put in Trump because everything has to be Donald Trump. The left can't look at anything without saying Donald Trump. The right, MAGA. They can't do it since 2020. But they're correct. This is a violation of justice. Atlanta's Cop City and the vital fight for urban forests. Notice their wording. It's a vital fight. The New Republic is putting it. It's a vital. This is justified. It is justified that the public's property has been taken away from them. That a group of people have decided that they can unilaterally violate every local, state, and federal law. I keep saying it because that is an insurrection. That these individuals, based on their feelings alone, can impose their will on an entire city, not one of them being an elected person. So we're seeing this over and over again. But that's not the only thing that upsets me about this. Because this is so in your face. This is meant to change your mind. The coverage, just like what we see about January 6th, is meant to tell you to obey, to understand it from the framework that the media has decided is okay, that the left have decided is okay. These guys are just protesting. Don't mind the acts of violence. Don't mind the destruction of property, the attempts to harm individuals' lives. Don't mind that they are violating the law. No. Throw that out the window. It's a peaceful protest. These are just protesters, and protesters can't be stopped, except when a protest destroys property, when a protest attacks human beings. That's not a protest. That's a violent mob. And in this case, that's insurrection. That's not a protest. But that's not the only way that they are trying to convince the public. There was a YouGov poll that just took place. We took part of it. And I want you to see this. This is a YouGov poll that came out today, March 9th, earlier in the day. And we took part in this. I want to show you. This is propaganda that is meant to prop up the public, and I guarantee you that there will be individuals who sponsored this poll who are going to try and use it to justify what they are doing. In fact, that's what the poll is about, to justify the insurrection that is happening in Atlanta right now. As you can see from the first question, police say at least 23 people will face domestic terrorism charges after they are arrested on Sunday during violent protests. Therefore, if it's a violent protest, it is not a protest. At the site of a planned police training center in Atlanta. Let me again say it. If it is a violent protest, it is not a protest. It wasn't. The violent protests on January 6th aren't being called protests, they're being called insurrection. So I use the same application here for Atlanta, but the news media won't. But this poll won't do that. Going on. Opponents of the project have referred to the proposed facility as, quote, Cop City. Opponents of the project, duly authorized by the city of Atlanta, by the people and their representatives that they elected, those people have called it Cop City. Going on. Today, we would like to hear your thoughts. The first question they ask, 35 protesters were arrested on Sunday at the site of the proposed police training center in Atlanta after swarming the construction site and getting equipment and other items on fire. The arrests of the latest development in an ongoing conflict between city officials and those attempting to halt the project's development. How much do you know? Most people, well over half, know very little about it. So, going forward. Second question. Opponents of the training facility say, opponents of the training facility, in other words, the criminals, the autonomous zones, the insurrectionists, individuals from Germany and France and outside of Georgia, the state, are saying that the project, quote, hyper-militarizes law enforcement, end quote. That's their opinion, not the city of Atlanta, not the people of Atlanta, but people from outside the state of Georgia. And that its construction on land which served as the old Atlanta prison farm until 1995. This is abandoned public property since 1995. Will cause environmental damage to the South River Forest. There is no evidence of that. That is what they believe. That's their opinion. There is no evidence, but that's their opinion. City officials say, now wait a minute, let me stop again, that it's going to cause environmental damage. I thought this was about protecting black people. I thought this was about police abuse. I thought that this was about hyper-militarization. Why are you talking about the environment? What does the environment have to do with hyper-militarization and that the police are overreaching their power according to the progressive far left? They're switching the argument. Why? Because they're not hyper-militarizing by creating a training facility to protect the people. They want to take away the ability of the city to protect its citizens and to help its citizens through training the police, the fire departments, and EMS, emergency medical services. Part of that training is also to sensitize the police and to better train them to interact with minorities and others. But they want to stop that. That's not hyper-militarization. That's why they have changed the argument and changed the discussion to environmental damage. Something they cannot prove, but it's also very difficult to disprove. And it's something that is more favorable today than the hyper-militarization that is obviously not correct. Going on, the poll says, city officials say that the 85-acre facility is expected to include classrooms, a shooting range, and other training courses for police, fire departments, and emergency medical services. Notice, the poll is very specific in what it is editing and the way they are asking the question. They want to change your mind. They are trying to influence the poll by editing out context and information in their question. They claim 265 acres will be preserved as green space. So to answer the question about environmental damage, there is already an understanding of that, and that there will be 265 acres of green space. So it is already being understood to protect the environment. That's already inclusive in the decision made by the city of Atlanta. So to say that this is going to cause environmental damage, to say that this is environmentally the justification, isn't correct. It's already been accounted for. And to say it's hypermilitarization is incorrect. But that's the question they're asking. That's the way they are framing this so as to change your mind. Then finally the question comes, do you think it's right or wrong to build the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center on this land? I think this is important. This isn't a question for people outside outside of Atlanta. This isn't a state decision for the state of Georgia. It's not a decision for people in Massachusetts or California. This isn't a decision for people in France or Germany. This is a decision for the people of the city of Atlanta. They get to make that decision. It has no matter how the public will view this, that's not their decision. It's only the decision of the people of the city of Atlanta. Even so, 65% of the public say it is right for the government, at least at the time that we took this poll, 65% said it is absolutely right for the city of Atlanta, through the authorization of the public, to make a facility that will better take care of the people of Atlanta. Okay, it's pretty clear. Now, what happens? But then they go on to say, would you support it if it was in your neighborhood? Yes, I do. I do support having better trained police, better trained firemen, better trained emergency medical services, EMS. Yes, I want them to be better trained. Yes, I want that in my neighborhood. And yes, I think it would lower crime in my neighborhood if they did that in my neighborhood. Yes, I would be happy to see that happen. Why not? And 65% of the people taking the poll at the time that I took it agreed with that opinion. Here's a question that I think is also important. The poll then interjects, protests have been ongoing at the proposed training facility since 2021. In January, officers shot and killed activist Manuel Esteban Paez Terran during a raid in the forested area, leading to heightened demonstrations. Let's get this right. Okay, so this wasn't a protest, it was an autonomous zone, which is illegal at its start. So the root of the problem is a group of people came into the forest, public land, and would not leave. They took over that property and they put up plaques and they made the public aware that they would not follow any local, state, or federal law. That is an autonomous zone. That is an act of insurrection. That is terrorist. And Manuel Terran, armed, started firing at police officers who were lawfully trying to get them to leave and had spent weeks trying to get them to leave the area peacefully. Actually, it wasn't just weeks. They spent months trying to peacefully get these individuals off of the property where they were illegally loitering. So there's a lot of information not being put in here. It is being made to seem like the police officers just decided to shoot and kill an activist, and that's not what happened. That's not the truth. Going on. On Sunday, 35 people were detained after violent agitators. This is 150 people. They're not just violent agitators, they are terrorists. Again, let's look at what they were doing. Did I show you the fire? Do you see the fire they have in the background there? These aren't violent agitators. They're firebombing. They're attacking the police. They are destroying public property. That's not an agitator. That's someone who's committing crime. These are criminals, violent criminals. On Sunday, 35 people were detained after violent agitators, violent criminals, attacked Atlantic police officers and equipment at the site with Molotov cocktails, commercial-grade fireworks, and bricks, which you can see in the video. Molotov cocktails, commercial-grade fireworks, and bricks. That's violence. That is intent to harm, if not, in some cases, kill. You get hit with a brick that's been thrown 35 yards, you may not be well if that hits you in the head. That could kill you. A Molotov cocktail could set you on fire. These are attempts to commit murder. That's not violent agitation. That's not people who are upset with a sign. That's criminal. That's violent criminal action. Notice how this poll, like many newspapers, like we have seen from The Atlantic and others, they're downplaying the violence and say, who do you think is most responsible for the escalation of violence at the proposed facility? Well, let's see. Who could possibly be guilty? We have people, protesters, these fanatics, the progressive fanatics that have come from outside the state, not just outside the city, outside the state and outside the United States, to come to a forest where they are illegally trespassing, to declare they will not follow any law of the United States government at the local, state, or federal level, who are trying to impede the ability of police officers to do their job as it was given to them lawfully by the city of Atlanta. Who could possibly be responsible for any violence that may happen as 150 of their members decided to commit acts of arson, violence with Molotov cocktails and bricks? The answer is the protesters. They're not protesters, they're violent criminals. And 70% of the people say it's them. But the one I want you to understand is 12% said it's the police. The police are guilty for following the law, for defending themselves. The police are guilty for being attacked by individuals with Molotov cocktails, bricks, and fireworks. They were being attacked and the police are at fault. 12% say that. This is how effective the propaganda is. Is it ever appropriate for protesters to engage in violence? If you are a protester, you are not violent. If you are using violence, then you are a criminal. It's that simple. 81% of the public can understand that the answer is no. If you're using violence, if you are committing arson, if you are committing murder, if you are trying to kill people with bricks and Molotov cocktails, you are a criminal, not a protester. 81% agreed with that, but 16% said, yes, sometimes that's okay. It's never okay. Never. Of the 35 people arrested and detained on domestic terrorism and other charges, 2 were from Georgia. 2 out of 35. Less than 10% of the people arrested were from Georgia, the state of Georgia. Police say the rest came from Maine, Arizona, Canada, France. Think about that. Only less than 10% of the people actually were from the state. Not even the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia. These people were coming from everywhere but the place involved. They know nothing about Atlanta. They don't live in Atlanta. They're not part of the politics of Atlanta. They have no understanding of the needs of the people of Atlanta. They do have an understanding of the needs of the progressive far left activists. They have an understanding of BLM and Antifa. They have an understanding of violating the laws of the United States government. But they don't have an understanding of Atlanta. And they decided to impose their will on the people of Atlanta that they know nothing about, that they have never been involved with for a day of their lives, until they decided to force the people of Atlanta to do what they want. That these violent criminals, these, quote, protesters, the defenders of Atlanta, BLM, Antifa, to force the public to obey. And they're supposed to be the good guys. Thinking about those arrested, do you think it's appropriate or inappropriate to charge them with domestic terrorism? It's appropriate. 73% of the people think it's appropriate to charge them with domestic terrorism, especially since some of them are coming from overseas. And many of them have nothing to do with Atlanta, let alone the state of Georgia. And this is yet another reason why I think this is an important question, an important poll to look at. How much sympathy, if any, do you have for protesters in Atlanta? Again, they're not protesters. These are violent criminals. These are individuals who have broken the law. They are insurrectionists. Their autonomous zone, by definition, is an act of insurrection and treason. Their actions of violence do not make them protesters. It makes them violent criminals. They are coming from outside Atlanta, outside the state of Georgia, outside the United States. There is nothing about this that is saying peaceful protest, law-abiding. There's nothing like that. Why would we have sympathy for people who are trying to impose their will on others? The answer is 70% said, no, I have no sympathy at all, including myself. Zero sympathy whatsoever. but 16%. The same amount that believe it's okay to commit violent acts, to commit arson, to commit murder, to commit assault, are okay. The same 16% are okay with having some sympathy for those protesters. I wonder why. So I'm using Atlanta now to try and bring this all together. When you start to understand these situations in context, when you actually use the correct terminology, the correct language, when you have an understanding of the law and it's put into context and presented to you, you get a better understanding of what's going on. I'm not telling you that you have to accept that everyone who was involved in the January 6th riots are good people. Never said that. And I'm not telling you that all the people who are involved in Atlanta in trying to destroy public property, to violate the law of the city and the state and the United States, to harm the people of the city of Atlanta. I'm not telling you that they're all bad people with bad intentions. I'm not saying that every one of them is involved in violence. But I am telling you that when you take a correct look, when you stop defining things by the media-friendly wording that implies their political bias, when you take out that bias and understand that these are violent criminals, and when you're looking at what they are doing and how it is harming people's lives, and then you look in comparison to January 6th in full context, as Tucker Carlson has begun to do, when we get to see more, when we get to see just even a few frames of non-approved messaging, that we have a very stark difference. When you saw the video from Tucker Carlson on Monday, and you looked at that video and saw him walking along the halls of Congress with an escort of 2 police officers, and then you're being told he is the symbol of violent oppression and insurrection, and then you look at the mob of people, as we've shown you, 150 people whose only intent was to commit arson and to attempt to harm, if not kill, police officers lawfully doing their job. Which one looks like an insurrection? Which one looks like violent crimes? Which one are committing actual violent crimes? But the media will tell you January 6th is the problem, and Atlanta, you shouldn't even talk about. You shouldn't even think about it. And they're putting up polls telling you it's not quite as bad as you think it is. You don't have to agree with me. But I'm asking you, when you look at things with full context, when you understand more of the details, does that match up with the message you're being told by news media from far left activists? Does that match what the progressive politicians are telling you? Whether it's January 6th or Atlanta, Georgia, I believe the answer is no. You're being lied to. You're being told to obey. You're being told to not go outside your lines, to think or feel anything that hasn't already been approved. And if anyone introduces information to you that might change your mind, that might give you pause, well, they're a bad guy too. And that's the problem. But maybe you think we've misunderstood. Links to everything we've discussed is in the description. I thank you for taking the time to hear what I have to say. I look forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments and in joining us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.